Married at 45 to a stranger, but he was hiding a fortune. Lila Hart scrubbed blood from a gambler's shirt at 3 in the morning when a man she'd never met offered her everything: a home, a name, and a way out of hell. She was 45, invisible, broken. He was calm, quiet, dangerous in his kindness. By dawn, she'd become his wife. By noon, the whole town tried to stop it. By sunset, she discovered he wasn't who he claimed to be. This is her story. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The winter wind cut through Blackstone Ridge like a butcher's blade, sharp and merciless, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke, whiskey, and desperation. It was the kind of cold that made bones ache and hearts harden, the kind that separated the living from the barely surviving. Lila Hart had long ago learned which category she belonged to. 3 o'clock in the morning. Her hands, raw and cracked, moved mechanically through the freezing wash water, scrubbing at the dark stains that never seemed to come clean. Blood, mostly. Sometimes mud. Sometimes things she didn't want to think about. The gambling house behind her roared with laughter and curses, men throwing away money they didn't have while she froze in a shack that barely kept out the wind. 45 years old. The number sat heavy in her chest like a stone. In Blackstone Ridge, a woman her age without a husband, without family, without means, she might as well be invisible. And most days she was. "Hart, where's my shirt?" Lila didn't flinch at the voice. Marcus Grell, owner of the Silver Spur gambling house, had a voice like gravel in a tin can, and he used it often. She wrung out the white shirt, his favorite, the one he wore when he wanted to look respectable, and hung it on the line strung across her shack. "Drying," she called back, her voice flat. "It better be ready by morning, or you'll answer for it." She didn't respond. What was there to say? Marcus held her wages, her shelter, her very existence in his thick, ring-covered fingers. One wrong word, and she'd be out on the street with nothing but the clothes on her back. At 45, there would be no coming back from that. The door to the gambling house slammed shut, and silence fell over her little corner of misery. Lila returned to the washtub, plunging her hands back into water so cold it made her joints scream. She'd learned not to cry about it. Tears froze in weather like this. Her shack, if it could even be called that, was a lean-to built against the back of the gambling house, constructed from scrap wood and mismatched boards. The roof leaked. The walls let in wind. There was a sleeping mat in one corner, a small stove that barely worked, and the washtub that had become her entire world. This was what her life had come to. This was what 45 looked like without fortune, without beauty, without the protection of a man's name. She used to be someone. The thought came unbidden, as it often did in the darkest hours. She used to have a home, a husband even, though that was so long ago it felt like someone else's memory. Thomas Hart had died 12 years back, leaving her with debts she couldn't pay, and a mother who blamed her for everything that went wrong after. The ranch had been sold. The life she'd known, gone. She'd drifted from town to town, taking work where she could find it, until she'd washed up here in Blackstone Ridge like debris from a shipwreck. The sound of boots on frozen ground made her look up. A man stood at the edge of the light cast by her single lantern, tall and still as a shadow. She hadn't heard him approach, which set her nerves on edge. In a town like this, men who moved quietly were either lawmen or trouble, and lawmen didn't come around washerwomen at 3 in the morning. "Evening," he said, his voice low and even. Lila kept her hands in the washtub, her body tense. "Gambling house is around front." "Not here for gambling." She studied him more carefully now. He was perhaps 40 himself, maybe a bit younger, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples and a face that looked like it had seen weather and hardship but hadn't broken under it. He wore a heavy coat, well made but not fancy, and his hat was pulled low. Everything about him seemed deliberate, controlled. "Then you're lost," she said. "Don't think so." He took a step closer, and she saw his eyes, gray as winter sky, direct but not cruel. "Saw you from the street, noticed your hands." Lila glanced down instinctively. Her hands were a wreck, red and split and bleeding in places where the cold and the lye soap had eaten through her skin. She pulled them from the water and wiped them on her apron, suddenly self-conscious. They're fine. They're not. He moved closer still, just to the edge of the shack's threshold, and she could see him better now. There was something solid about him, something that didn't match the drifters and gamblers that usually pass through town. You work here? That's my business. Fair enough. He was quiet for a moment, watching her with an intensity that made her want to step back, but there was nowhere to step back to. Name's Caleb Voss. I'm heading out to Iron Vale Ranch come morning. Rode in to get supplies. Lila said nothing. She'd heard of Iron Vale, everyone had. It was one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, sprawling across thousands of acres to the north. Old man Carver owned it, or had owned it. Rumor was he was dying. And, she finally said, and I'm looking for someone. Her stomach tightened. This was where it always went wrong. Men didn't seek out women in the middle of the night with good intentions. Not interested. Hear me out. No. I'll pay you for your time, just to listen. Lila laughed, a bitter sound. I don't have time to sell. Marcus will have my head if his laundry isn't done. Caleb glanced at the washtub, at the pile of stained clothes waiting to be scrubbed, at the ice forming on the surface of the water. When he looked back at her, there was something close to anger in his eyes, not directed at her, but at the situation. How much does he pay you? Enough. How much? She hesitated. $1 a week, plus the shack. The silence that followed was heavy. Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. $1 a week, plus the shack, she repeated, as if that made it better. It didn't. And you work through the night. Sometimes. Every night. She didn't answer. They both knew the truth. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out coins, real silver, not the script that Marcus usually paid in, and held them out to her. $5. Just to listen for 10 minutes. Lila stared at the money. $5 was more than a month's wages, more than she'd held in her hand at one time in years. Every instinct screamed at her that this was a trap, that men didn't hand out money for nothing, that whatever he wanted would cost her more than $5 could ever cover. But her hands hurt, her back hurt. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones she wasn't sure she'd ever be warm again. And she was so tired. 10 minutes, she said, taking the coins. They were heavy in her palm, real and solid. Then you leave. Caleb nodded and settled back on his heels, making himself less imposing. I need help at Iron Vale. Someone to cook, keep house, manage the domestic side of the ranch. The hands can take care of cattle and horses, but we need someone who can run a household. Get a wife. Working on that. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. He met her gaze without flinching. I'm offering a job, he continued. Room and board, separate cabin, $2 a week to start. More once things are settled. Honest work, honest pay. It sounded impossible. It sounded like a lie. Why me? Because you're still standing. The answer caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. You don't know anything about me. I know you're working yourself to death for a man who pays you scraps. I know you haven't quit, which means you're either tough as nails or got nowhere else to go. I'm guessing both. Caleb shifted his weight, and she saw the weariness in him too, the kind that came from carrying heavy burdens for too long. I need someone who won't fold at the first hard wind. Ranch life isn't easy. And you think I can handle it because I wash blood out of gamblers' shirts? I think you can handle it because you're still here. Lila wanted to laugh again, but something stopped her. There was no mockery in his voice, no cruelty. He meant what he said. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her like she was worth something that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. What's the catch? She asked. No catch. There's always a catch. Caleb considered this. All right. The catch is it's hard work. The catch is Iron Vale is miles from anywhere, and winter up there makes this look mild. The catch is you'd be working for a man most people think is a bastard, literally, and there's politics involved you'd get caught up in. You. Me. She studied him again, looking for the lie, the angle, the trap. But all she saw was a tired man offering tired work to a tired woman. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all there ever was. I'm 45 years old, she said quietly. I heard you the first time. I'm not. She gestured vaguely at herself, at her worn dress and ruined hands and the gray in her hair that she'd stopped bothering to hide. I'm not what men usually look for. I'm not usual men. Caleb straightened, and she was reminded again of his height, his solidity. I need help. You need a way out. This can work for both of us. Just like that. Just like that. It was too simple. Life was never this simple. But Lila's hands were bleeding, and Marcus would be back before dawn to check on his shirts. And she was so cold she couldn't feel her feet anymore. What did she have to lose? Her shack? Her $1 a week? Her pride had been gone for years. When do you leave? She heard herself ask. Dawn, few hours from now. That's not enough time to... It's enough time to decide. That's all you need. Caleb pulled a small card from his pocket and held it out. Ironvale Ranch. Anyone in town can tell you where it is. If you want the job, meet me at the livery stable when the sun comes up. If you don't, keep the $5 and forget we talked. Lila took the card with numb fingers. In the lamplight, she could just make out the words printed there. Ironvale Ranch, property of J. Carver. And if I say yes, she asked, then we ride out at dawn and you start a new life. Just like that. Just like that. He tipped his hat to her. Actually tipped his hat, like she was a lady instead of a washerwoman freezing in a shack, and turned to go. But he paused at the edge of the light. One more thing, he said, not looking back. You deserve better than this. Don't let anyone tell you different. Then he was gone, boots crunching on frozen ground, swallowed by the darkness. Lila stood alone in her shack, holding $5 silver and a business card, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't know what to do. The smart thing would be to forget it. Finish the laundry, collect her $1 at the end of the week, survive another 7 days. That was what she did. That was what she was good at, surviving. But the coins were heavy in her hand and Caleb's words echoed in her head. You deserve better than this. Did she? She honestly didn't know anymore. The hours before dawn passed in a blur. Lila finished the laundry by rote, her mind elsewhere. She scrubbed and rinsed and wrung until every shirt and vest and pair of trousers was clean enough to pass Marcus's inspection. Her hands screamed in protest, fresh blood mixing with the wash water, but she barely noticed. $2 a week. A cabin of her own. Honest work. It had to be a lie. Men didn't offer women like her opportunities like that, and yet Caleb hadn't looked at her the way most men did, with either desire or disgust depending on what they wanted. He'd looked at her like she was a person, a worker, someone with value beyond her youth or her beauty, both of which were long gone. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten from black to deep blue, Lila had made her decision. She owned almost nothing, which made packing easy. 2 dresses, one for work and one for Sunday that she hadn't worn in years. A shawl. A comb with missing teeth. A small daguerreotype of Thomas that she kept meaning to throw away but never did. All of it fit into a cloth bag that had seen better days. The $5 went into a pocket she'd sewn into the lining of her skirt. Everything she owned, everything she was, could be carried in one hand. Marcus would be furious. He'd probably dock her last week's pay, not that there was much to dock. He might even come after her, though she doubted it. One washerwoman was much like another, and there were always desperate women willing to work for scraps. The thought should have comforted her. Instead, it made her sad. The livery stable sat at the edge of town, a large building that smelled of hay and horses and leather. Lila approached it as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the snow-covered street in shades of pink and gold. It would have been beautiful if she'd had the energy to notice. Caleb was there, as promised. He stood beside 2 horses, one a sturdy bay gelding, the other a smaller mare with kind eyes. When he saw Lila, something in his expression shifted. Relief, maybe. Or satisfaction. You came, he said. I came. She gripped her bag tighter. Does the offer still stand? It does. $2 a week, cabin, honest work? $2 a week, cabin, honest work, he confirmed. Then he paused. Though I should probably mention the other part now. Lila's stomach dropped. Here it was. The catch. The real reason. The thing that would make sense of all this impossible generosity. What other part? Caleb met her eyes steadily. I need a wife. The words hung in the frozen air between them. A wife, Lila repeated flatly. A wife in name, to start. Legal and binding, but on your terms. Separate quarters unless and until you decide otherwise. No expectations beyond what you're comfortable with. But I need to be married, and soon, for reasons I'll explain on the road. This was it. This was the moment to walk away, to go back to Marcus and her shack and her $1 a week. This was insanity. You didn't marry strangers. You didn't trust men who offered too much. You didn't— Why me? She asked again. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm 42 years old, and I'm tired of pretending youth matters more than strength. Because you've lived enough life to know what you're getting into. Because you won't expect things I can't give, and I won't expect things you can't give, and maybe that's enough to build something real on. You don't know me. You don't know me either, but we can learn. He gestured to the horses. I'll understand if you walk away. This is more than you signed up for, but the offer stands. Marriage, partnership, a share in whatever I build out at Iron Vale. Or just the job, if that's all you want. Your choice. A wife. At 45, with gray hair and ruined hands and nothing to offer but a lifetime of hard work and harder lessons. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was the only real choice she'd been offered in 12 years. If I say yes, Lila said slowly, we do this proper, legal, no going back on your word. Agreed. And if it doesn't work, if I can't stand it or you can't stand me, I get to leave with enough money to start over somewhere else. Agreed? And you tell me the truth, all of it, why you really need a wife, what's waiting at Iron Vale, what I'm walking into. Caleb nodded. On the road, I'll tell you everything. Lila looked at the horses, at the rising sun, at the town of Blackstone Ridge still sleeping behind her. Somewhere in the Silver Spur, Marcus would be waking up, expecting his clean shirts and his obedient washerwoman. Somewhere in the nicer part of town, her mother would be stirring, probably already composing the lecture she'd deliver if she knew what Lila was considering. But Lila was so tired of being small, so tired of being invisible, so tired of surviving instead of living. All right, she said, I'll marry you. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. Then we'd better do this before you change your mind. He helped her onto the smaller horse, a gentler mount than she'd expected, and swung up onto his own. As they turned toward the main street, Lila felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. Where are we going? She asked. To make it legal. The town clerk's office was in the municipal building, a squat structure that also housed the sheriff and the land office. It wouldn't open for another hour, but Caleb seemed unconcerned. He tied the horses and led Lila around to the back entrance. Wait here, he said, and disappeared inside. Lila waited, her bag clutched in her arms, her breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. Part of her expected him not to come back. Part of her expected this whole thing to evaporate like a dream. But 10 minutes later, the door opened and Caleb emerged with a thin, irritated-looking man in a wrinkled shirt. This is highly irregular, the clerk was saying. The office doesn't open until— I know when the office opens, Fletcher. I also know you owe my friend Garrett $20 from poker, and he's willing to forgive it if you do this favor. Fletcher's mouth snapped shut. He looked at Lila, at Caleb, and back at Lila. Both of you want this? We do, Caleb said. The clerk looked at Lila. Ma'am? This was it. Last chance to run. Last chance to go back to what she knew, horrible as it was. Last chance to choose safety over risk. Yes, Lila said. I want this. Fletcher sighed. Fine. Come inside. The office was cramped and cluttered, stacks of papers and ledgers covering every surface. Fletcher pulled out a large book and flipped to a blank page, then looked at them expectantly. Names. Caleb Voss. Lila Hart, Fletcher wrote slowly, his pen scratching across the page. Ages? 42. 45. If Fletcher had any reaction to their ages, he didn't show it. Witnesses? I'll fetch someone, Caleb said, and disappeared again. Lila stood in the office, listening to the clock tick on the wall. This was happening. She was actually doing this. She was going to marry a man she'd met 4 hours ago in the dark behind a gambling house. She was going to become Lila Voss, wife of a stranger, bound by law to a future she couldn't imagine. The door opened and Caleb returned with 2 men. One old, one young, both looking confused but willing. "These'll do," he said. Fletcher cleared his throat. "Right then. Under the laws of this territory, I am authorized to solemnize marriages. Do you, Caleb Voss, take this woman as your lawful wife?" "I do." "Do you, Lila Hart, take this man as your lawful husband?" The moment stretched. Lila thought of Marcus, of her shack, of her bleeding hands, and her invisible existence. She thought of Caleb's steady gray eyes and his promise. "You deserve better than this." "I do," she said. "Then by the power vested in me, I declare you married. Sign here." They signed. The witnesses signed. Fletcher signed and dated and sealed the document with wax and his official stamp. Just like that, it was done. Lila Hart had ceased to exist. In her place stood Lila Voss, married woman, wife of Caleb Voss, bound until death. "Congratulations," Fletcher said without enthusiasm. "That'll be $2. Caleb paid, and they stepped back out into the morning. The sun was higher now, and Blackstone Ridge was beginning to wake. Somewhere, Marcus was probably cursing her name. "Well," Caleb said, "that's done." "That's done," Lila agreed. She felt strange, unmoored. "What now?" "Now we ride to Ironvale, and I tell you everything." He helped her back onto the mare. "You ready?" Was she? Lila looked back at the town one last time. 12 years she'd spent here, and she wouldn't miss a single moment of it. Whatever waited at Ironvale, whatever truth Caleb needed to tell her, it couldn't be worse than washing blood from strangers' clothes in the dark. "I'm ready," she said. They rode out as the town came alive around them, and Lila didn't look back again. The road north wound through pine forests heavy with snow, the horse's breath forming white plumes in the frozen air. Lila rode in silence beside Caleb, her body adjusting to the rhythm of the mare beneath her. It had been years since she'd ridden, but the skill came back slowly, muscle memory asserting itself despite the cold and the stiffness in her joints. They'd been traveling for nearly an hour before Caleb finally spoke. "You handle a horse well." "Had a ranch once," Lila said, her voice rough from disuse. "Long time ago." "What happened to it?" "Husband died. Debts came due. Bank took it all." She kept her eyes on the trail ahead. "That's when I learned what I was worth without a man's name protecting me." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "And now you've got a man's name again." "Different circumstances." "Very different." He shifted in his saddle. "I promised you the truth, about Iron Vale, about why I needed to marry. You want it now or after we've put more distance between us and town?" Lila considered. Part of her wanted to know immediately, to understand what she'd walked into. But another part, the part that had learned to survive by not asking too many questions, wanted to delay the inevitable disappointment a little longer. "Now," she said, "before I have time to regret this." A ghost of a smile crossed Caleb's face. "Fair enough." He pulled his horse to a stop at a wide spot in the trail where a frozen stream cut through the trees. "We'll rest the horses. This might take a while." They dismounted, and Caleb produced a canteen and some dried meat from his saddlebag. Lila accepted both gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. The meat was tough, but flavorful, and the water, though cold enough to hurt her teeth, was clean and clear. "Ironvale Ranch," Caleb began, leaning against a tree, "is owned by a man named Jonathan Carver. He's 73 years old, and he's dying. Cancer, the doctor says. Maybe 6 months left, probably less." Lila chewed slowly, watching him. Carver built that ranch from nothing. Came west 40 years ago with a wagon, a wife, and dreams bigger than the territory itself. He succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Ironvale is nearly 30,000 acres now, finest cattle operation in 3 territories. But here's the problem, he never had legitimate children. The way Caleb emphasized legitimate made Lila's stomach tighten. His wife, Margaret, couldn't bear children. Tried for years, but it never happened. So Carver, being the kind of man he was, looked elsewhere. Caleb's jaw tightened. My mother was a Shoshone woman who worked in the ranch kitchen. She was 17. Carver was 35 and married. Lila said nothing. She'd heard variations of this story before. The West was full of men who took what they wanted and children who paid the price. She got pregnant with me, Caleb continued. Carver gave her money and sent her away before Margaret could find out. My mother went back to her people, but she was already too far removed from that life. I was born between worlds, belonging to neither. She did her best, but she died when I was 12. Fever took her. I'm sorry, Lila said quietly. Caleb shrugged, but the gesture was heavy with old pain. After she died, I had nowhere to go. Ended up drifting, working ranches, learning the trade. Got good at it. Eventually made my way back to Iron Vale territory, though I never told anyone who I was. Just another ranch hand. Carver didn't know you. Didn't recognize me. Why would he? I was just another half-breed cowboy looking for work. He'd probably forgotten my mother's name by then. The bitterness in Caleb's voice was sharp enough to cut. I worked Iron Vale for 3 years before he figured it out. How? I got hurt. Horse threw me, broke my collarbone. Doctor came out to set it, and while he was working, he saw a birthmark on my shoulder. Same birthmark Carver has. The old man happened to be there, saw it too. Caleb touched his left shoulder unconsciously. Everything changed after that. Lila wrapped her shawl tighter against the cold. He acknowledged you? Not publicly, but privately, yes. Started teaching me the ranch operation, how everything worked. Made it clear I had his blood, even if I didn't have his name. Margaret never knew. She died 2 years back, still thinking she'd been the only woman in his life. Caleb's expression was unreadable. Last month, Carver called me into his office, told me he was dying and that he wanted to leave Iron Vale to me. That's good, isn't it? That's what you'd want? It's what I'd earned, Caleb corrected. But there's a problem. Carver has a nephew, Richard Carver, who's been circling the ranch like a vulture for years. Richard's mother was Carver's sister, and she married money back east. Richard grew up with every advantage: education, connections, social standing. He's legitimate in all the ways I'm not. And he wants the ranch. He expects the ranch. In his mind, it's already his. He's been positioning himself for years, making friends with the territorial governor, the land office, the banks. He's got law and society on his side. Caleb met her eyes. I've got Carver's word and blood that doesn't mean anything in a courtroom. Lila was beginning to understand. So Carver needs you to look legitimate. He's trying to make me legitimate. Drew up papers, signed them in front of witnesses. But Richard's already challenging it. Says Carver isn't of sound mind, that I manipulated a dying old man. The case could drag on for years, and I could lose everything. Caleb paused. Unless I can prove I'm stable, established, the kind of man who deserves to inherit a legacy. And a wife helps with that. A wife helps tremendously with that. He looked at her steadily. Richard portrays me as a drifter, a bastard with no roots and no respectability. But a married man with a household? That's different. That's someone building a life, not just chasing an inheritance. Lila absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. So you needed to marry quickly before the legal challenges got worse. Before Richard could paint me as unworthy, yes. And you chose me because you're exactly what I needed. Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. Not some young girl who'd expect romance and pretty words. Not a social climber looking to better her position. You're a woman who understands hard work and harder choices. Someone who won't fold when things get difficult. And they will get difficult. Richard will challenge the marriage. He'll try. He'll call you a gold digger, probably. Say, I married you for show. But here's what he won't be able to say. That you're some young fortune hunter. You're 45. You came from nothing. You married me when I was nobody, as far as anyone knows. That's not a woman chasing money. That's a woman choosing partnership. It made a terrible kind of sense. Lila had spent enough years navigating the world to understand how these things worked. Perception mattered more than truth. A respectable marriage mattered more than love. What happens if Richard wins anyway, she asked. Then we lose the ranch, and I go back to being a hired hand somewhere. But you'd be provided for. I meant what I said. You can leave any time with enough money to start over. That's in writing, witnessed and signed. You're not trapped. And if you win, then Iron Veil is ours, not mine, ours, legal partners in everything. Caleb straightened, his eyes intense. I know this isn't what you expected when you took my offer. I know I should have told you everything before we married, but I needed you to decide free from the pressure of knowing what was at stake. Now you know. And now you can still walk away if you want. I'll give you money, a horse, enough to get you anywhere you want to go. Lila looked at him. This man she'd married 4 hours ago, the stranger who'd offered her honesty when he could have continued lying. He'd given her a choice. Even now, knowing she could destroy his plans by leaving, he was giving her a choice. When was the last time anyone had done that? I'm not walking away, she said. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Relief, perhaps? Or respect? You're sure? I signed papers saying I'm your wife. Those papers are legal and binding. I don't go back on my word. She met his gaze squarely. You need respectability? I'll give you respectability. You need someone who won't crumble when Richard comes at us? I've survived worse than rich men's lawyers. We made a bargain. I intend to keep it. Caleb nodded slowly. Then we should talk about what comes next. What comes next? We need to go back to Blackstone Ridge. Lila stared at him. What? Why? Because right now we're married by a half-asleep town clerk with 2 random witnesses. That might be legal, but it doesn't look good. We need to do this properly, in front of the whole town, public and witnessed by people who matter. We need it to be unquestionable. Caleb, Marcus can go to hell, Caleb said flatly. You don't work for him anymore. You don't answer to him. You're my wife, and we're going to stand up in front of that town and make that clear to everyone. Fear twisted in Lila's gut. You don't understand. Going back there, facing all of them. I understand perfectly. They treated you like you were nothing. They watched you break yourself for scraps and didn't lift a finger. But you're not nothing anymore, Lila. You're a married woman with means and standing, and they need to see that. Why? The word came out sharper than she intended. Why does it matter what they think? Because when Richard's lawyers come sniffing around, and they will, they're going to interview people, ask questions about our marriage, about how we met, about whether it's legitimate. I want those people to remember seeing us married properly, publicly, with you standing proud as my wife. I want them to have no ammunition. It made sense strategically, but the thought of returning to Blackstone Ridge, of facing Marcus and her mother and everyone who'd watched her fade into invisibility, made Lila want to be sick. What if I can't do it? She asked quietly. Caleb moved closer, his voice gentler. You can. You've done harder things. And this time, you won't be alone. I'll be right there beside you. Lila wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that having someone stand with her would make a difference. But 45 years of experience had taught her that people disappointed you, that promises broke, that when things got difficult, you were always alone. Still, she'd made a choice. She'd signed the papers. And Caleb was right. If they were going to make this work, they needed to do it properly. All right, she said, we go back. But after that, we leave and we don't return. Ever. Agreed. They mounted up again and turned the horses back toward Blackstone Ridge. The sun was higher now, the morning well established. Lila's hands still hurt, her body still ached from years of hard labor, but something had shifted. She wasn't riding toward her old life, she was riding toward the end of it. The town looked different in daylight, less threatening somehow, more pathetic. Lila saw it now through new eyes. The shabby buildings, the mud-churned streets, the sense of desperation that hung over everything like smoke. She'd thought Blackstone Ridge was just how life was. Now she wondered how she'd survived it for so long. Caleb led them straight to the church, a white-painted building at the center of town that Lila had passed 100 times but never entered. The Reverend, a thin man named Clayton, looked surprised to see them. Mr. Voss, he said, eyeing Caleb with the wariness reserved for strangers with purpose. What can I do for you? My wife and I would like to formalize our marriage in front of the community, Caleb said. This afternoon, if possible. Clayton's eyes shifted to Lila, and she saw the moment of recognition. saw him place her as the washerwoman from behind the gambling house, the invisible woman who scrubbed clothes in the dark. His surprise was almost comical. "Your wife," he repeated. "My wife," Caleb confirmed, his tone brooking no argument. "Lila Voss. We were married this morning by Fletcher in the territorial office, but we'd like a proper ceremony as well." "I see." Clayton was clearly trying to process this. "And you want this afternoon?" "This afternoon. We have business at Ironvale Ranch and need to be on our way." Caleb's hand moved to Lila's back, a gesture of casual possession that sent a strange warmth through her. "Can you accommodate us, Reverend?" Clayton hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose so. 3 o'clock?" 3 o'clock is perfect." Word spread through Blackstone Ridge like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew that Lila Hart, broken, invisible Lila Hart, had somehow convinced a stranger to marry her. The gossip was vicious and immediate. Lila heard snatches of it as she and Caleb walked through town, Caleb making a point of stopping at the general store, the telegraph office, the land office, making sure people saw them together. Yeah. Desperate, that's what it is. Wonder what she promised him. Probably trapped him somehow. 45 years old, can you imagine? Lila kept her head up and her expression neutral, but each word landed like a small blade. Caleb seemed oblivious to the whispers, or perhaps he just didn't care. He treated her with consistent courtesy, his hand at her elbow when they crossed the muddy street, his voice calm and respectful when he introduced her. "My wife, Lila." 2 words that changed everything. At 2:30 they returned to the church. A crowd had already gathered, not because anyone cared about Lila's happiness, but because scandal was the best entertainment Blackstone Ridge had to offer. Lila recognized faces in the pews, women who'd ignored her when she'd passed them on the street, men who'd propositioned her behind the gambling house, thinking she was desperate enough to accept. All of them staring now, judging, waiting for this strange marriage to fall apart so they could feel superior. Caleb led her to the front of the church, and Reverend Clayton took his place at the altar. The ceremony should have started then, would have started if the door hadn't crashed open. Marcus Grell stood in the doorway, his face red with rage. "This is an outrage," he shouted. "That woman owes me. She's under contract." The crowd murmured, excited. This was better than they'd hoped for. Caleb turned slowly, his expression dangerous. "What contract?" "Work contract. She agreed to work for me, and she ran off without notice. Left all my laundry half done, cost me business." "You paid her $1 a week to freeze in a shack," Caleb interrupted, his voice cold. "There's no contract that makes that legal, and you know it." "She's a thief. She took money." "I gave her that money," Caleb said, "for her time, which she's no longer required to give you. Mrs. Voss is done with your employment, and if you have a problem with that, take it up with a lawyer." Marcus sputtered, looking around for support. She can't, she can, and she has." Caleb took a step toward Marcus, and something in his posture made the larger man step back. "Now get out of this church before I remove you myself." For a moment it seemed like Marcus might push the issue, but whatever he saw in Caleb's eyes made him think better of it. He jabbed a finger at Lila. "You'll regret this," he spat. "When he's done with you, when he throws you away, you'll come crawling back, and I won't take you." "Good," Lila heard herself say. Her voice was steady, stronger than she felt. "I wouldn't work for you again if I was starving." Marcus's face went purple. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Caleb's expression stopped him. With a final curse, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Reverend Clayton cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should, continue?" But before he could begin again, another voice cut through the church. "Stop this! Stop this right now!" Lila's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice, knew it better than her own. Her mother, Eleanor Hart, stood from a pew near the back. She was 68 years old, still handsome in a severe way, dressed in black as she had been since Lila's father died 30 years ago. Her eyes were hard as flint. "This marriage cannot proceed," Eleanor announced. Caleb's hand tightened on Lila's arm. "And you are I'm her mother, and I have information this man deserves to know before he binds himself to damaged goods." The crowd leaned forward, hungry for whatever revelation was coming. Lila felt her throat close. She knew what Eleanor was going to say. Knew, and couldn't stop it. "Mama, don't." When Lila was 23, Eleanor continued, her voice carrying through the church, she was engaged to a young man named Thomas Hart. Good man, decent prospects. But before they could marry, she ruined herself. Lila's face burned. 45 years old, and her mother could still make her feel like a child being punished. "There was a baby," Eleanor said, "conceived out of wedlock. Shameful, but these things happen. Thomas agreed to marry her anyway, to give the child a name. But Lila lost the baby 3 months before the wedding, and do you know what I did?" No one spoke. The church was absolutely silent. "I made a bargain with Thomas," Eleanor said. "Told him he didn't have to go through with it. The baby was gone, so there was no reason to tie himself to a woman who'd proven herself worthless. But Thomas, fool that he was, married her anyway, and it destroyed him. 12 years of struggle and disappointment before he died, leaving her with nothing because she'd never been worth anything." Lila couldn't breathe. The old shame crashed over her, drowning her. Every eye in the church was on her, every face reflecting judgment and disgust. She wanted to disappear, wanted to die, wanted to be anywhere but here, having her deepest wounds exposed for entertainment. But Caleb's hand stayed steady on her arm. "Are you finished?" he asked Eleanor, his voice glacial. Eleanor lifted her chin. "I'm telling you the truth. My daughter is damaged, used. She lost that baby because there was something wrong with her, something broken inside. She'll never give you children. She'll never give you anything but disappointment and shame." "I see." Caleb released Lila's arm and stepped forward, moving to stand between her and her mother. "Let me tell you what I see, Mrs. Hart. I see a woman who survived tragedy and kept going. I see a woman who endured years of hard labor and cruelty and didn't break. I see a woman strong enough to build a life from nothing, which is more than most can claim." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Caleb's voice cut like a razor. "You're embarrassed by your daughter because she didn't fit the mold you wanted, because she's 45 and unmarried and worked as a washerwoman, because in your eyes, that makes her worthless. But here's what you don't understand. I don't want children. I don't need a young wife. I need a partner who knows how to survive, how to work, how to stand when life tries to knock her down. And Lila is exactly that." Eleanor's face twisted. "This is absurd. You've known her for what, a day? Long enough to know she's worth 100 of the people in this church." Caleb turned back to Lila, his eyes finding hers. "Long enough to know I'd be proud to call her my wife." Something broke open in Lila's chest. Tears burned at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry, not here, not in front of these people. Caleb held out his hand. "Do you still want this?" It was the question underneath the question. Did she still want this marriage, knowing what it would cost? Knowing that her shame was now public, that Richard's lawyers would find out about it, that it would be used against them? Lila looked at her mother's disgusted face, at the eager judging crowd, at Marcus's empty chair where he'd sat before storming out, at this whole terrible town that had ground her down to nothing. Then she looked at Caleb, at this man who'd stood between her and all of it, who'd called her strong instead of broken, who'd given her a choice when he could have simply walked away. She took his hand. "Yes," she said clearly. "I want this." Reverend Clayton, looking deeply uncomfortable, raised his voice. "If anyone has lawful objection to this union, speak now, or—" "I object." Every head turned. A man stood at the back of the church, well-dressed and confident. Lila had never seen him before, but Caleb's expression darkened immediately. "Richard," he said. Richard Carver smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Cousin, what an interesting development. I came to Blackstone Ridge to discuss ranch business with you, and what do I find? A hasty marriage to a woman of questionable reputation." "Get out," Caleb said. "I don't think so. This concerns me directly." Well, Richard walked down the aisle like he owned it. "You're trying to legitimize yourself, I understand that. But marrying a desperate washerwoman with a scandal in her past? That's not legitimacy, Caleb. That's pathetic." Caleb moved fast. One moment he was standing beside Lila. The next he had Richard by the collar, slamming him against the nearest pew. The church erupted in gasps and shouts. "Listen carefully," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. "You can challenge me all you want. You can fight me in court, question my legitimacy, try to steal what I've earned. But you will not insult my wife. You will not speak of her past or her reputation or anything else about her. Is that clear?" Richard's smile never wavered. "Threatening me in a church? In front of witnesses? That'll look wonderful in court. I don't care how it looks." Caleb released him with a shove. "You want to fight me, but leave her out of it." "I'm afraid that's impossible. Your marriage is relevant to the inheritance dispute. The court will want to know everything about Mrs. Voss, her background, her character, her motivations for marrying you so quickly. All of it will become public record." Lila found her voice. "Let it." Richard turned to her, surprised. "Excuse me?" "Let it all become public record. My past, my mistakes, all of it. I'm not ashamed anymore." She moved to stand beside Caleb. "You want to paint me as a gold digger? Go ahead. I married a man I thought was a ranch hand. I married him when I believed he had nothing but honest work to offer. If that makes me a gold digger, then the word has lost all meaning. You married him after one night. I married him because he was the first person in 12 years to treat me like a human being instead of a piece of furniture." Lila's voice grew stronger. "You can question that all you want, Mr. Carver, but it won't change the facts. We're married, legally and properly. And unless you have grounds to stop this ceremony, I suggest you leave." Richard looked between them, calculating. Whatever he saw made him step back. "This isn't over," he said. "Never thought it was," Caleb replied. Richard left, his footsteps echoing in the silent church. When the door closed behind him, Reverend Clayton spoke hesitantly. "Should we, continue?" Caleb looked at Lila. "Should we?" She nodded. They'd come this far. They might as well finish it. Clayton led them through the ceremony again, his voice shaking slightly. The traditional words that had been spoken over countless couples, binding them in the eyes of the law and the community. When it came time for the vows, Caleb spoke clearly. "I promise to stand with you, not above you, to respect your strength and support you in weakness, to be honest, even when it's hard, and to never make you feel less than you are." The words weren't standard, they weren't what was expected, but they were what Lila needed to hear. When it was her turn, she kept it simple. "I promise to keep my word, to do my share, and to stand when you need me to stand." Clayton pronounced them married, again for the second time that day. This time, though, it felt real. This time, it felt like a choice they'd both made with open eyes. As they walked back down the aisle, Lila saw her mother's face, twisted with disgust. Saw the crowd's mixture of disappointment that there'd been no bigger scandal and fascination at what would happen next. Saw the whole town that had ground her down, watching her leave on the arm of a man who'd called her strong. She held her head high. Outside, the winter sun was bright on the snow. Caleb helped her onto her horse, and they rode out of Blackstone Ridge for the second and final time. Behind them, Lila could hear the eruption of gossip, everyone rushing to discuss what they'd witnessed. She didn't care anymore. They rode for an hour in silence before Caleb finally spoke. "You all right?" Lila considered the question. Was she all right? Her mother had exposed her deepest shame in front of an entire town. Her new husband's enemy had threatened them publicly. She'd burned every bridge she had to a life she'd never wanted. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. "I think I am." Caleb nodded. "Richard will make trouble." "I know. Your mother will probably spread more stories." "Let her. The whole territory will be talking about us by next week." "Good." Lila looked at him. "Let them talk. I'm tired of being quiet. I'm tired of being small. If they want to judge me, let them. I married you in front of witnesses and the whole town. That's done. It's real. And whatever comes next, we'll face it." Something like pride crossed Caleb's face. "You're tougher than I thought. You have no idea." They rode on toward Iron Vale, leaving Blackstone Ridge and everything it represented behind them. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges neither of them could fully predict. Richard would fight them, Eleanor would spread poison, society would judge them. But Lila had spent 45 years surviving impossible situations. She'd endured poverty, widowhood, invisibility, and shame. She'd scrubbed blood from strangers' clothes until her hands bled, worked for wages that couldn't sustain life, lived in a shack that barely kept out the cold. And she was still here, still standing, still strong enough to choose a hard future over an impossible past. Beside her, Caleb rode with quiet determination, this man who'd seen her at her lowest and offered her dignity instead of pity, this stranger who'd become her husband twice in one day, this partner in an uncertain venture that might end in triumph or disaster. Either way, Lila realized, it would be her choice, her life, her future. For the first time in 12 years, that was enough. The road to Iron Vale stretched endlessly through the winter landscape, each mile taking them further from the chaos of Blackstone Ridge and deeper into territory Lila had never seen. The pine forest gave way to open grassland, snow-covered and vast, broken only by the occasional outcropping of rock or frozen creek. The silence between them was comfortable now, born not from awkwardness but from shared exhaustion. They'd both fought battles that day, and the weariness showed in the set of Caleb's shoulders, the way Lila's hands gripped the reins just a bit too tight. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink, Caleb pointed toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. Iron Vale, he said simply. Lila studied the ranch as they approached. It was larger than she'd imagined, more substantial. The main house was a two-story structure built from timber and stone, solid and weathered by years of hard use. Around it spread a collection of outbuildings, bunkhouses, barns, corrals, storage sheds. Even in winter, even with most of the cattle moved to lower pastures, the place hummed with purpose and order. This wasn't some struggling outfit. This was an empire built from nothing, exactly as Caleb had described. A few ranch hands looked up as they rode in, their faces registering surprise at the sight of Caleb with a woman. Caleb nodded to them but didn't stop, leading Lila directly to the main house. He dismounted and came around to help her down, his hand steady at her waist. "Let me do the talking at first," he said quietly. "Carver doesn't know about the marriage yet." Lila's stomach tightened. "He won't approve. He'll adapt. He doesn't have much choice." Caleb squeezed her hand once, brief and reassuring, then led her up the steps to the wide front porch. The door opened before they could knock. A middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes looked them over, her gaze lingering on Lila with open curiosity. "Caleb," she said, "you're back sooner than expected, and with company. Martha, this is Lila, my wife. Lila, this is Martha Boone. She manages the household here." Martha's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Your wife. As of this morning. Is Carver in his study?" "He is, but—" Caleb was already moving past her, drawing Lila along. They crossed through an entrance hall that spoke of wealth earned rather than inherited. Good furniture but practical, quality rugs worn from use, walls hung with landscapes of the territory rather than family portraits. Everything about the house suggested a man who'd built something real and wasn't interested in pretending otherwise. The study door stood partially open. Caleb knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Jonathan Carver sat behind a massive desk, papers spread before him, a lamp burning against the gathering dusk. He was exactly as Lila had pictured him, tall even sitting down, with white hair and a face carved by decades of sun and wind into something resembling weathered granite. His eyes, when they lifted to look at Caleb, were still sharp despite his age and illness. They shifted to Lila, and she felt the weight of his assessment. "You brought someone," Carver observed, his voice gravelly. "I brought my wife," Caleb said, "Lila Voss. We were married this morning in Blackstone Ridge." The silence that followed was absolute. Carver set down his pen with deliberate care, his expression unreadable. "Your wife," he repeated. "Yes." "You've been gone 2 days." "I know." Carver's eyes never left Lila. She forced herself to stand straight, to meet his gaze without flinching. She'd faced down her mother and Marcus and a church full of judgment today. She could face one dying rancher. "What's your story, Mrs. Voss?" Carver asked her directly. Lila glanced at Caleb, who nodded slightly. "I'm 45 years old," she said clearly. "I was widowed 12 years ago, lost my ranch, and have been working where I could since then. Caleb offered me honest work and honest terms. I accepted. And marriage was part of those terms? Marriage became part of those terms, yes. Carver leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly. The cancer, Lila realized. You know about the inheritance dispute. I do. Caleb told me everything. And you married him anyway. I married him because of it, in part. He needed a wife to appear more stable. I needed a way out of Blackstone Ridge. It was a fair bargain. Something that might have been amusement flickered in Carver's eyes. A fair bargain. That's an honest answer, at least. He turned to Caleb. Richard's already filing challenges. He heard about the marriage somehow, probably has people watching the territorial office. He'll claim it's a sham arrangement designed to make you look legitimate. It is designed to make me look legitimate, Caleb said. That doesn't make it a sham. Legally, there's a difference. But perception matters more than law sometimes. Carver coughed, a harsh sound that spoke of fluid in his lungs. When he recovered, his expression was grim. This complicates things. Or it simplifies them, Caleb countered. I'm married now, established, building a household. That's what you wanted. What I wanted was time to make this transition smooth. What I'm getting is a court battle that could drag on for years. Carver's gaze shifted back to Lila. No offense to your wife, but Richard will tear her apart on the stand if this goes to testimony. Then he can try, Lila heard herself say. Both men looked at her. I've been torn apart before. I'm still here. Carver studied her for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression. You've got spine. That's good. You'll need it. He turned back to Caleb. Martha's prepared the west cabin for you. It's small but private. Get settled, both of you. We'll talk strategy in the morning. It was a dismissal, but not an unkind one. Caleb nodded and guided Lila from the study. Martha was waiting in the hall, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been sympathy. The west cabin is ready, she said. I'll have some supper sent over. Thank you, Martha, Caleb said. The cabin was indeed small, 2 rooms plus a kitchen area, but it was clean and warm and more comfortable than anywhere Lila had lived in over a decade. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and the bedroom held an actual bed with a real mattress and quilts that looked handmade. After the shack in Blackstone Ridge, it seemed impossibly luxurious. Lila stood in the center of the main room, suddenly uncertain. This was real now. She was here, in this cabin, married to a man she barely knew, about to become embroiled in a legal battle that could destroy them both. You can have the bedroom, Caleb said, breaking the silence. I'll take the sofa out here. Lila turned to look at him. We're married. We are. But I meant what I said. Separate quarters until and unless you decide otherwise. I'm not going to force anything. That's not... Lila struggled to find the words. People will talk if we're not sharing a bed. Richard will use it against us. Let him try. Our marriage is legal regardless of sleeping arrangements. But it looks like I'm respecting my wife's comfort, Caleb interrupted gently. That's all. Anyone who wants to make something ugly out of that says more about them than us. Lila didn't know what to say to that. Men didn't talk like this, didn't think like this. In her experience, marriage meant obligation, duty, submission to whatever the husband demanded. But Caleb kept offering her choices, kept treating her like a person with agency and rights. She didn't know how to accept it. A knock at the door saved her from having to respond. Martha entered with a tray, bread, cheese, cold roasted chicken, and coffee that actually smelled like coffee, rather than the burnt substitute Lila had been surviving on. Carver wants to see you both tomorrow morning, Martha said, setting the tray on the small table. 8 o'clock in the study. He's planning to talk with his lawyer about the marriage and how to position it legally. We'll be there, Caleb said. Martha paused at the door, looking at Lila. There's a bathhouse behind the main building, hot water and everything. You're welcome to it any time. After she left, Lila stared at the food, her stomach growling despite her anxiety. When had she last eaten a real meal? The dried meat on the trail didn't count. They ate in silence, and for the first time in years, Lila didn't have to ration every bite. There was enough, more than enough. When she reached for a second piece of bread, she caught Caleb watching her. What? She asked, defensive. Nothing. Just glad to see you eat. She bit into the bread, its texture soft and perfect. I'm not usually this hungry. You've been starving yourself for years. Your body's catching up. The bluntness of it stung, but he wasn't wrong. Lila had grown so used to hunger it had become background noise, barely noticeable. Now, with actual food available, the deprivation showed itself. They finished the meal, and Caleb showed her to the bedroom. There's nightclothes in the dresser. Martha must have put them there. They'll probably be too big, but they're clean. Lila touched the quilts, their weight and warmth real under her fingers. Thank you. For what? For keeping your word. For not... She gestured vaguely. For not being worse. Caleb's expression softened. That's a low bar, Lila. It's the bar I've got. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then I'll try to clear it every day. Sleep well. After he closed the door, Lila sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake. The day crashed over her all at once. The marriage, the confrontations, the revelations, the journey, all of it. She'd gone from scrubbing Marcus's shirts in freezing water to sitting in a warm cabin as a married woman with legal standing and a future that didn't involve slow starvation. It didn't feel real. It felt like a dream she'd wake from to find herself back in the shack, Marcus shouting for his laundry, her hands bleeding into the wash water. But the bed was solid beneath her. The quilts were heavy and real. And when she finally lay down, exhaustion pulled her under into sleep deeper and more peaceful than any she'd known in years. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Where was she? This wasn't the shack. This wasn't... Memory flooded back. Iron Veil. Caleb. Marriage. Everything that had happened yesterday. Lila rose and found the nightclothes Martha had left, far too large, as Caleb had predicted, but clean and soft. She dressed quickly in her work dress, the same one she'd worn yesterday, and emerged from the bedroom to find Caleb already up, 2 cups of coffee poured. Morning, he said. We've got an hour before we're due at the main house. The coffee was hot and strong and perfect. Lila wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring the warmth. What should I expect? Carver will want to know everything about you, your past, your family, anything Richard might use against us. His lawyer, a man named Thomas Brennan, will be there too. He's good, but he's cautious. He'll see problems everywhere. Oh, should I be worried? Brennan's on our side, but he'll play devil's advocate. Better to face hard questions from him than from Richard's lawyers in court. Lila nodded, steeling herself. She'd faced down her mother yesterday. She could face a lawyer. They walked to the main house together, the morning cold but clear. Ranch hands were already at work, their voices carrying across the yard. A few nodded respectfully to Caleb, their eyes curious on Lila. She wondered what they'd been told, what they thought of their boss's bastard son suddenly showing up with a wife. Martha met them at the door and led them directly to the study. Carver sat behind his desk as before, but this morning another man occupied one of the chairs, tall, thin, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the pinched expression of someone who saw disaster around every corner. Thomas Brennan, the man said, rising to shake Caleb's hand. His eyes moved to Lila, assessing. And you must be Mrs. Voss. I am. Please sit. Brennan waited until they were settled before opening a leather portfolio. I've reviewed the marriage certificate. It's legal and properly executed. That's the good news. The bad news is that Richard has already filed a motion claiming the marriage is a fraudulent attempt to bolster Mr. Voss's claim to the inheritance. On what grounds? Caleb asked. On the grounds that you married after learning about the will, that the marriage is too recent to be genuine, and that Mrs. Voss's background raises questions about her motivations. Brennan looked at Lila. I need to ask you some difficult questions, Mrs. Voss. I apologize in advance. Go ahead, Lila said, her voice steady. Why did you marry Caleb Voss? He offered me honest work and honest terms. The marriage was part of those terms. So it was transactional. All marriages are transactional to some degree. Mine is just more honest about it. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly. Richard will portray you as a desperate woman willing to do anything for security. I was desperate. I won't deny that. But I chose security through legal marriage rather than the alternatives available to desperate women. That speaks to character, not against it. Your previous marriage. Ended 12 years ago when my husband died. I lost the ranch to creditors. I've been working honestly since then. Working as a washerwoman for a gambling house. Working as a washerwoman, yes. The gambling house was where I could find employment. I'm not ashamed of honest labor. Brennan made notes, his expression neutral. Your mother made certain claims yesterday about a child born out of wedlock. Lila's hands tightened on the arms of her chair, but she kept her voice level. I was engaged to Thomas Hart. We anticipated our wedding vows. I became pregnant. We married, and I lost the baby 3 months later. These things happened 23 years ago and have no bearing on my marriage to Caleb now. Richard will argue they speak to your character. Then Richard is a fool, Carver said suddenly, his voice sharp. A woman who made a mistake at 22 and still managed to build a life deserves respect, not condemnation. If that's the best ammunition he's got, he's desperate. Brennan looked at Carver over his spectacles. Nevertheless, it will come up. We need to be prepared. We are prepared, Lila said. My past is my past. I'm not hiding from it. If Richard wants to drag it out in court, let him. It won't change the facts of my marriage to Caleb. Which are that we married legally, publicly, and with full knowledge of each other's circumstances. I knew Caleb was involved in an inheritance dispute. He knew I was a widow with nothing to my name. We chose each other anyway. That's the truth. Brennan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're better under pressure than I expected. I've had practice. That will serve you well. Richard's lawyers will try to rattle you, make you seem desperate or conniving, or both. If you can maintain that composure, it will help our case considerably. Caleb spoke up. What's the timeline? When does this go before a judge? 2 weeks. Richard's pushing for an expedited hearing, claiming that Carver's deteriorating health makes time of the essence. The judge agreed. Brennan's expression was grave. That's both good and bad. Good because it gets resolved quickly. Bad because we have very little time to prepare. What do we need to do? Lila asked. Establish your marriage as genuine. Live as husband and wife publicly and visibly. Be seen together in town, at church, conducting business as a married couple. Build a narrative that contradicts Richard's claims. We can do that, Caleb said. There's one more thing. Brennan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. The judge may want to interview you separately, Mrs. Voss. Ask you questions about your marriage, your husband, your motivations. It's not standard, but in contested inheritance cases, it happens. I can handle it? I hope so. Because if you slip, if you say anything that makes the marriage seem arranged or insincere, Richard will use it to destroy Caleb's claim. Brennan closed his portfolio. I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to prepare you. This will be difficult. Mr. Brennan, Lila said, leaning forward slightly, I've spent the last 12 years watching people treat me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter, like my work and my life and my very existence were worth less than nothing. I married Caleb because he saw me, because he treated me like a person with value. That's the truth. And that's what I'll tell anyone who asks. If that's not enough for your judge, then the law is more broken than I thought. Silence filled the study. Then Carver laughed, a harsh but genuine sound. I like her, he said to Caleb. She's got fire. I noticed, Caleb said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Lila's chest tighten. Brennan stood, gathering his papers. I'll file our response to Richard's motion today. In the meantime, be visible, be together, build the life you're claiming to have. And Mrs. Voss? Yes? Don't let Richard intimidate you. He'll try. He's very good at it. But if you can stand up to him the way you just stood up to me, you'll be fine. After Brennan left, Carver gestured for them to stay seated. There's something else we need to discuss. The ranch. What about it? Caleb asked. If I die before this is settled, and I might, the whole operation falls into legal limbo. Richard could try to take control as next of kin, freeze accounts, fire hands, dismantle everything I've built. Carver's hands shook slightly as he spoke. I've made provisions, but they're not ironclad. We need to make you indispensable here, Caleb. Not just as my heir, but as someone the ranch can't function without. How? By having you take over the day-to-day operations now, publicly, with Lila at your side, managing the household. Make it clear that you're already running Iron Vale, that you've earned that position through work, not just through blood. Carver coughed again, longer this time. When he recovered, his face was gray. Martha's been handling the household, but she's getting on in years. Lila, if you're willing, I'd like you to take over those responsibilities. Learn the operation, meet the wives of the hands, establish yourself as the lady of the house. The title felt absurd. Lila, lady of anything, but she nodded. I can do that. Good. Because Richard's going to paint Caleb as an opportunist and you as his accomplice. We need to show that you're both integral to Iron Vale's success, that this isn't about inheritance, it's about earning a place through actual work. Over the next week, Lila threw herself into learning Iron Vale. Martha, despite her initial skepticism, proved to be an excellent teacher. She showed Lila the account books, the supply systems, the schedules that kept a ranch of this size functioning. There were 12 permanent hands plus seasonal workers, all needing to be fed, housed, and managed. There were cattle to track, pastures to rotate, equipment to maintain, and 100 small details that Martha had been juggling alone. Lila absorbed it all with the same determination she'd once used to survive in Blackstone Ridge. She met the hands' wives, women who viewed her with cautious curiosity, wondering what to make of this older woman who'd appeared so suddenly. She learned names, families, needs. She reorganized the kitchen, updated the inventory systems, and discovered she had a talent for making order from chaos. Caleb, meanwhile, took over the cattle operation completely. He rode out with the hands, checked fences, moved stock, made decisions that Carver would have made if he'd been healthy. The men responded to him, not because of his connection to Carver, but because he knew the work and did it alongside them without complaint. In the evenings, Lila and Caleb would return to their cabin and compare notes. He still slept on the sofa. She still took the bedroom. But slowly, carefully, they were building something that looked like partnership. On the 8th day, Richard Carver came to Iron Vale. He arrived in a hired carriage dressed like he was attending a society function rather than visiting a working ranch. Lila saw him from the kitchen window of the main house and felt her stomach drop. "Martha," she said quietly. "Get Caleb." But Caleb was already striding across the yard, his expression dark. Lila moved to the porch, staying back but visible. She wanted Richard to see her, wanted him to know she wasn't hiding. "Cousin," Richard called out pleasantly. "And the new Mrs. Voss. How domestic." "What do you want, Richard?" Caleb asked. "Just checking on Uncle Jonathan, making sure he's being properly cared for in his final days." Richard's smile was sharp. "I have every right to visit family." "You have the right, but you're not welcome." "That's not very hospitable, especially from someone trying to prove he belongs here." Richard's eyes shifted to Lila. "Mrs. Voss, how are you adjusting to ranch life? It must be quite different from washing clothes behind a gambling house." "It's different," Lila said evenly. "Better, more honest work, better people." "Honest work, yes, I'm sure you're very busy. Tell me, what exactly do you do here all day?" "I manage the household, coordinate supplies, oversee the kitchen, handle accounts, supervise staff. The same work any rancher's wife does." "A rancher's wife? How quickly you've risen in the world." Caleb stepped between them. "Say what you came to say, Richard. Then leave." Richard's pleasant facade dropped. "Fine. I came to make you an offer. Walk away. Annul the marriage, renounce any claim to Iron Vale, and I'll pay you $50,000. Cash. Enough to start your own place, live comfortably. You could even keep your washerwoman wife if you're attached to her." The number was staggering. $50,000 was more money than Lila could imagine. Enough to buy security, comfort, a real future. Caleb didn't hesitate. "No." "You're refusing $50,000? "I'm refusing to walk away from what I've earned. Iron Vale isn't for sale, Richard. Not to you, not for any price." "Even though you'll lose anyway? Even though the court will see through this pathetic marriage and rule against you?" "We'll see." Richard's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Both of you. When this is over, when you've lost everything, don't say I didn't offer you a way out." He climbed back into his carriage and left, the wheels churning through the muddy yard. Lila watched until he disappeared, then turned to find Caleb watching her. "You could have taken it," she said quietly. $50,000. That's real money. And walked away from my father's legacy? From everything I've worked for?" Caleb shook his head. "No, money doesn't replace belonging. Some people would say you're a fool. Some people would be wrong." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "Are you all right? He was cruel to you." "I've survived worse cruelty from better people," Lila said. "But thank you for asking." The hearing was set for the following Monday. Brennan prepared them as best he could, running through potential questions, coaching Lila on how to answer. But no amount of preparation could fully ready her for walking into that courtroom and facing judgment again. The territorial courthouse in Silver Springs was the imposing stone building that spoke of law and order and consequences. Lila and Caleb entered together, Carver behind them in a wheelchair. His health had deteriorated sharply in the past week. Richard was already there, surrounded by 3 lawyers in expensive suits, looking confident and entitled. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Helena Marsh, took her seat and surveyed the room with sharp eyes. "This is a hearing to determine the validity of Jonathan Carver's will and the claim of Caleb Voss to inherit Iron Vale Ranch. Mr. Brennan, please present your case." What followed was hours of legal argument, testimony, document review. Brennan presented the marriage certificate, witness statements from Blackstone Ridge, testimony from Martha and the ranch hands about Caleb's work. Richard's lawyers countered with allegations of fraud, questions about timing, implications about character. Finally, Judge Marsh looked directly at Lila. "Mrs. Voss, I'd like to hear from you directly. Why did you marry Caleb Voss?" Lila stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "Because he offered me respect, honest work, and partnership. Because after 12 years of being treated like I didn't matter, he saw me as a person with value." "And the inheritance had nothing to do with it?" "I didn't know about the inheritance when I accepted his first offer. I learned about it later, yes, but by then I'd already agreed to marry him." "Why agree so quickly? You'd known him less than a day." "Your Honor, I'd known desperation for 12 years. I knew exactly what I was getting with Marcus and Blackstone Ridge. Slow starvation and eventual death. Caleb offered me a chance at something better. I took it. Even though it might have been a lie? It wasn't a lie. He's kept every promise he made. That's more than most men can claim." Judge Marsh studied her. "Richard Carver's lawyers claim this marriage is a sham designed to make Caleb Voss appear more legitimate. What do you say to that?" Lila took a breath. "The marriage is real and legal. Our reasons for entering it might not be romantic, but they're honest. We're partners building a life together. If that's not legitimate, then half the marriages in this territory aren't either." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Marsh's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Voss, do you have anything to add?" Caleb stood. "Only that I married Lila because I needed a strong partner, not a decoration. Someone who could help me build something real. She's proven herself every day since. If the court wants to call that illegitimate, then the court doesn't understand what real marriage looks like." More murmurs. Richard's lead lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of calculated presentation we expected. They've rehearsed these answers." "They're married," Carver's voice cut through the room, weak but commanding. "Legally, properly, publicly. My son needed a wife. He found one. What business is it of yours or anyone else's, whether they married for love or partnership or simple practicality?" "Mr. Carver." "I'm dying," Carver continued. "I don't have time for this nonsense. I built Iron Vale from nothing. I earned the right to leave it to whomever I choose. I choose Caleb. He's my blood, my student, and the only one who's actually worked that land. Richard there has never set foot on Iron Vale except to calculate its value. If that's not enough for this court, then the law is more interested in appearance than justice." Judge Marsh held up her hand for silence. "I'll take all testimony under advisement. This hearing is adjourned. I'll issue my ruling within 48 hours." They filed out of the courthouse into weak afternoon sunlight. Carver looked exhausted, his face gray with pain. Caleb helped him into the wagon they'd brought, careful of his fragile frame. "That went well," Brennan said, though he didn't sound convinced. The judge seemed sympathetic, at least. Or she was hiding her real opinion, Lila said. We won't know until she rules. They made the long ride back to Iron Vale in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Lila kept replaying her testimony, wondering if she'd said enough, said too much, revealed something that would damn them. The weight of everything, the marriage, the inheritance, the future, pressed down on her shoulders until she could barely breathe. That night, unable to sleep, she sat by the fire in the cabin. Caleb joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Can't sleep either? He asked. Too much in my head. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling. Finally, Caleb spoke. Whatever happens, you'll be taken care of. I've set aside money, made arrangements. If we lose, you won't go back to Blackstone Ridge or anything like it. I know. Do you? He turned to look at her. Because I need you to know. This isn't about keeping you as long as you're useful. This is permanent. You're my wife. That means something to me. Lila felt tears burn at her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed through all of this. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why me? You could have found someone younger, prettier, someone without all this baggage. I didn't want younger or prettier. I wanted real. Caleb's hand covered hers. You're real, Lila. You know what matters and what doesn't. You've survived things that would have destroyed weaker people. That's what I needed. That's what I wanted. The tears spilled over. Lila couldn't stop them. 45 years of holding everything in, and this man's simple honesty broke through every defense she had. Caleb pulled her close, and she let him. Let herself lean on someone for the first time in years. Let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe she wasn't alone anymore. They sat that way until the fire burned low, neither speaking, both understanding that whatever the judge decided, whatever happened next, something between them had shifted into truth. The 48 hours stretched into an eternity. Lila threw herself into work, organizing the spring supply orders, meeting with the ranch hands' wives about expanding the vegetable gardens, anything to keep her mind occupied. But beneath every task, beneath every conversation, the question loomed, what would Judge Marsh decide? Caleb was equally restless, riding the fence lines obsessively, checking cattle that didn't need checking, working himself into exhaustion each night. They barely spoke, each wrapped in their own anxiety, the fragile intimacy of that night by the fire buried under the weight of waiting. On the morning of the second day, a rider came from Silver Springs. Lila saw him from the kitchen window and felt her heart stop. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the main house, where Carver sat in his wheelchair on the front porch, Caleb standing beside him. The rider dismounted and handed Brennan, who'd stayed at Iron Vale to await the verdict, an official-looking envelope. Brennan broke the seal with hands that weren't quite steady. He read in silence, his expression giving nothing away. The seconds ticked past like hours. Well? Carver demanded, his voice weak but sharp. Brennan looked up, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. Judge Marsh has ruled in our favor. The will stands. Caleb Voss is recognized as Jonathan Carver's legitimate heir, with all rights and privileges therein. The marriage to Lila Voss is deemed legal and genuine. Richard's challenges are dismissed with prejudice. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Caleb let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for weeks. We won, he said, as if testing the words. You won, Brennan confirmed. Judge Marsh was quite explicit in her ruling. She stated that marriage for practical reasons is no less valid than marriage for romantic ones, that Lila's testimony demonstrated genuine partnership, and that Caleb's work at Iron Vale proved his fitness to inherit regardless of the circumstances of his birth. Carver laughed, the sound harsh but triumphant. Take that, Richard. The bastard wins after all. Lila felt dizzy. They'd won. Against all odds, against Richard's money and lawyers and social standing, they'd actually won. She was the wife of the heir to Iron Vale Ranch. She had a home, security, a future that didn't involve freezing in a shack or scrubbing strangers' blood from fabric. It felt impossible. It felt like a dream that would shatter if she examined it too closely. There's more, Brennan said, still reading. Judge Marsh has ordered Richard to pay court costs and legal fees. She's also issued a restraining order preventing him from interfering with Iron Vale's operations or harassing either of you. He can appeal, but given the strength of her language, I doubt he'll succeed. He'll appeal anyway, Caleb said. He won't let this go. Let him try. We have the law on our side now. Brennan folded the letter carefully. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Voss. You've earned this. After Brennan left to file the necessary paperwork in Silver Springs, Lila found herself alone with Caleb in the yard. The ranch hands had heard the news and were celebrating in the bunkhouse, their voices carrying across the winter air. Martha was inside with Carver, helping him to bed. The excitement had exhausted him. We should celebrate too, Caleb said, but he sounded uncertain, like he didn't quite know how. Should we? Lila asked. Feels strange, like it might disappear if we acknowledge it. I know what you mean. Caleb looked out over the ranch, his ranch now, his expression unreadable. I spent so long fighting for this. Now that I have it, I don't know what to do with the feeling. Hold on to it, Lila suggested. We've earned it, like Brennan said. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Iron Vale's vast expanse. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. The ranch settled into its evening rhythm, indifferent to the legal battles and human dramas that swirled around it. It would be here long after all of them were gone, Lila realized. That was both humbling and oddly comforting. Lila, Caleb said quietly, there's something you should know, something I haven't told you yet. Her stomach tightened. Here it was. The other shoe, dropping. What? Carver's will. It doesn't just leave me the ranch, it leaves it to both of us. Joint ownership, equal shares. He changed it after we married. Lila stared at him. What? You're not just the wife of the heir. You're an heir yourself. Half of Iron Vale is yours legally. If something happens to me, if we divorce, whatever, your share stays yours. The implications crashed over her. She owned half of one of the largest ranches in the territory. She, Lila Hart Voss, who'd been washing clothes in a shack 2 weeks ago, now owned thousands of acres of prime land. Why? She managed. Why would Carver do that? Because I asked him to. Caleb met her eyes. I told you this was a partnership. I meant it. You've worked as hard as I have these past weeks. You've faced down Richard, survived the hearing, built a place here. You deserve equal stake in what we're building. Lila's hands were shaking. Caleb, that's not how marriages work. The husband owns not this marriage, not us. His voice was firm. We're partners, Lila, equal partners. That's what I wanted from the beginning, even if I didn't say it clearly enough. She didn't know what to say. Men didn't do this. Men didn't give women equal ownership, equal voice, equal anything. Yet here was Caleb offering her not just security but actual power, actual autonomy. I don't know how to accept this, she admitted. You don't have to know. Just take it. It's yours. Caleb's expression softened. You've spent your whole life being told you weren't enough. Weren't young enough, pretty enough, valuable enough. I'm telling you different. You're enough exactly as you are. And this ranch is as much yours as it is mine. The tears came again, hot and unexpected. Lila turned away, not wanting him to see, but Caleb gently turned her back. It's all right, he said. You can cry. You've earned that too. So she did. She cried for the years of hardship, for the nights of cold and hunger, for every moment she'd felt invisible and worthless. She cried for the girl who'd lost a baby and been blamed for it, for the widow who'd lost her ranch, for the washerwoman who'd bled into freezing water. She cried for all the versions of herself that had survived impossible things. And when the tears finally stopped, she felt lighter, cleaner, like something had been released that she'd been carrying for far too long. Thank you, she said hoarsely. For what? For seeing me. For all of it. Caleb squeezed her hand. You made it easy. That night, for the first time since they'd married, Lila didn't retreat to the bedroom immediately after supper. She sat with Caleb by the fire and they talked, really talked, about their childhoods, their losses, their dreams, about what they wanted Iron Vale to become, how they'd manage it together, what changes they'd make. I want to expand the house, Caleb said. Not to be fancy, but to be functional. More rooms for when the Hands families visit. A proper office, maybe a library. A library? Lila couldn't hide her surprise. I like to read. Never had many books growing up, but I like them. Thought we could build a collection, make it available to everyone on the ranch who wants it. The idea charmed her. I'd like that. And I want to improve the workers' housing. Those bunkhouses are falling apart. We could build proper cabins for the married Hands, give them real homes. Good idea. Anything else? Lila hesitated, then pushed forward. I want to hire more women, not just for kitchen work, but for ranch work. I've seen how hard Martha works, how much the wives contribute without being paid. They should have real positions, real wages. Caleb considered this. That'll raise eyebrows. Ranches don't usually... I know what ranches usually do. I'm saying we could do better. If we're building something new here, let's actually build something new. A slow smile spread across Caleb's face. All right, we'll do it. Equal wages for equal work, regardless of gender. Let them talk. They stayed up late, planning and dreaming, and when Lila finally went to bed, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope for a future that might actually be good. 3 days later, Carver's health took a dramatic turn for the worse. Lila was in the kitchen when Martha came running, her face pale. It's Mr. Carver. He's asking for both of you. The doctor says... She couldn't finish the sentence. They ran to the main house. Carver lay in his bed, his breathing labored, his face gray as ash. The doctor stood nearby, his expression grim. This was it. The end they'd all known was coming. Caleb, Carver rasped. Lila, come here. They moved to his bedside. His hand, when Lila took it, was cold and papery thin. I don't have much time, he said, each word an effort. Need to say this while I can. Caleb, you proved me right. You're twice the man Richard will ever be. You earned this ranch, every acre. I'm proud to call you my son. Caleb's jaw worked. Thank you. For everything. For giving me a chance. You gave yourself the chance. You worked for it. Carver's eyes shifted to Lila. And you're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone make you small again. You're a rancher's wife now. Act like it. I will, Lila promised. Good. Carver coughed, a wet, terrible sound. Take care of each other. Take care of Iron Vale. Make it something worth remembering. We will, Caleb said, his voice thick. Carver closed his eyes. Good. That's good. I can rest now. He died 20 minutes later, peacefully, with Caleb and Lila on either side of him. The doctor called it, noted the time, and quietly left to make the necessary arrangements. Martha wept silently in the corner. The ranch hands, when they heard, removed their hats and stood in respectful silence. Jonathan Carver, builder of empires, father of bastards, complicated man of contradictions, was gone. The funeral was held 3 days later. It seemed like the entire territory turned out. Ranchers who'd competed with Carver, merchants who'd done business with him, politicians who'd sought his support. Even Richard came, dressed in black, his expression carefully neutral. He didn't speak to Caleb or Lila, but his presence was a reminder that even in death, Carver's legacy was contested ground. Lila stood beside Caleb throughout the ceremony, feeling the weight of watching eyes. Everyone was assessing them, she realized, wondering if they were strong enough to hold what Carver had built, wondering if the bastard son and his washerwoman wife could possibly measure up. Let them wonder. She'd stopped caring what people thought somewhere between Blackstone Ridge and this moment. After the burial, after the guests had left and the ranch had settled back into its rhythms, Lila and Caleb returned to their cabin. It felt different now. Not temporary, not borrowed, but theirs. Really, theirs. We should move into the main house, Caleb said. It's ours now. Makes sense for the owners to live there. Lila looked around the small cabin that had been her haven, her safe place. Can we wait? Just a little while? I'm not ready to leave this yet. Caleb nodded. We'll wait as long as you need. That night as they sat by the fire, Caleb spoke quietly. There's something else we need to discuss. About us. Lila's heart quickened. What about us? This arrangement we have. Separate bedrooms, partnership, but not... He gestured vaguely. Not a real marriage in all senses? Is that still what you want? The question hung in the air between them. Lila thought about the past weeks, about how Caleb had stood beside her through everything, how he'd defended her, believed in her, made her an equal partner. She thought about the comfort she felt in his presence, the way her heart lifted when he came home each evening, the warmth that spread through her when he smiled. I don't know what I want, she admitted. I've spent so long just surviving, I forgot how to want things for myself. That's fair. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you what I want? Yes. I want this to be real. Not just on paper, but actually real. I want you as my wife in every sense. But only if that's what you want too. I won't push. I won't demand. But I wanted you to know. Lila's breath caught. She was 45 years old. She had gray hair and scarred hands and a past full of shame. She'd long since accepted that romance, desire, real partnership, those things weren't for women like her. But Caleb was looking at her like she mattered, like she was desirable, like age and scars and history didn't diminish her value. I'm afraid, she said quietly. Of what? Of wanting this and having it taken away. Of believing this is real and finding out it's not. Of, her voice broke. Of not being enough. Caleb moved closer, taking her hands in his. Lila, listen to me. You're enough. You've always been enough. The world tried to tell you different, but the world was wrong. How can you be sure? Because I've seen you. Really seen you. I've watched you face down your mother, Richard. A courtroom full of judgment. I've watched you learn this ranch inside and out in a matter of weeks. I've watched you be kind to Martha, fair to the hands, strategic with the books. You're remarkable. How could that not be enough? The tears came again, but this time they felt different. Not grief or release, but something gentler. Something that might have been joy. I want this to be real too, she whispered. Caleb's expression transformed. Yeah? Yeah, I'm terrified, but I want it. I want you. I want us to be real. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, asking permission with every movement. And Lila, who'd spent decades believing she was past such things, kissed him back and felt something long dormant stir to life inside her. They moved to the bedroom together that night, and for the first time in her marriage to Caleb, Lila didn't sleep alone. She lay beside her husband, his arm around her, and felt safe, felt chosen, felt enough. In the morning, she woke to find Caleb already up, making coffee. He brought her a cup in bed, which made her laugh. What? He asked, smiling. I'm not used to being waited on. Get used to it. You're the Lady of Iron Vale now. He sat on the edge of the bed, and there's something you should know about that title. It comes with responsibilities. What kind of responsibilities? The kind where half the territory is going to be watching to see if we fail. Richard will appeal the ruling. Brennan confirmed it yesterday. It could drag on for months, maybe years. And even if we win every challenge, people will be waiting for us to make mistakes, to prove we don't deserve this. Lila sat up, taking the coffee. Then we don't make mistakes. We work harder than anyone expects. We make Iron Vale so successful, they can't question whether we belong here. That's a tall order. Good thing we're both used to tall orders. She met his eyes over the rim of her cup. We've survived everything thrown at us so far. Whatever comes next, we'll survive that too. Caleb's smile was warm and genuine. I believe you. Over the following weeks, they settled into their new life as the official owners of Iron Vale. They moved into the main house, though Lila insisted on keeping the cabin for when they needed privacy. They hired a new foreman to help manage the daily operations, freeing Caleb to focus on long-term strategy. Lila implemented her plan for hiring women workers, bringing in 2 widows to help with the cattle operation, and promoting Martha to official household manager with a proper salary. The changes caused talk, as Caleb had predicted. But the ranch ran smoothly, the books balanced, and the cattle thrived. By spring, even the skeptics had to admit that Caleb and Lila knew what they were doing. Richard did appeal, just as expected. But each challenge was weaker than the last, his arguments growing more desperate as Judge Marsh's ruling held firm. Brennan handled it all with quiet competence, and slowly, the legal threats began to fade into background noise. One evening in late April, as Lila sat on the porch of the main house watching the sunset, Caleb came to sit beside her. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "I was thinking about Blackstone Ridge," she admitted, "about where I was 6 months ago." "Do you regret leaving?" "Not for a second. I was just thinking about how impossible this would have seemed then. If someone had told me I'd be sitting here, co-owner of a ranch, married to a man who actually respects me, I would have thought they were cruel, making up stories to torment me. And now? Now I'm learning to believe it's real." She took his hand. "Learning to trust that good things can happen, even to women like me." "Women like you?" "Older, broken, used up." Caleb turned to face her fully. "Lila, you're none of those things. You're experienced, resilient, and valuable. There's a difference. The world doesn't usually see it that way. Then the world's an idiot." He kissed her forehead. "I see it that way, and I'm the one who matters." Lila laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "Arrogant. Confident. There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade over their land. Their land. The words still felt surreal, but Lila was beginning to accept them as truth. "Caleb," she said after a while. "Thank you." "For what?" "For stopping that night in Blackstone Ridge, for seeing me when everyone else looked through me, for giving me a chance when I'd given up on chances. You gave yourself the chance by saying yes. I just offered the opportunity. Still, thank you." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you for taking the risk, for standing with me through everything, for becoming my partner in all of this." As night fell over Iron Vale, Lila felt something settle deep in her bones. This was home, not just a place to survive, but a place to live, to thrive, to build something lasting with a man who saw her value when the rest of the world had written her off. She was 45 years old, and her life was just beginning. The summer arrived with a heat that transformed Iron Vale into something green and alive, the grasslands stretching endlessly under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Lila stood in the expanded vegetable garden behind the main house, dirt under her fingernails, sweat dampening her collar, and felt something close to contentment. The tomato plants were thriving, the beans climbing their poles with determination, and the herbs she'd planted filled the air with scents that reminded her of better times, of the ranch she'd lost so many years ago. Martha appeared at the garden gate, waving a telegram. "Just came from Silver Springs. Brennan sent it." Lila wiped her hands on her apron and took the paper. Her heart quickened as she read, then quickened again for a different reason entirely. "Caleb?" she called toward the barn where he'd been working with the new horses. "Caleb, come here." He appeared within moments, concern written across his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's—" She handed him the telegram, watching his expression change as he read. Richard's final appeal had been denied. The Territorial Supreme Court had ruled decisively in favor of Judge Marsh's original decision, citing the strength of the evidence and the legitimacy of both the will and the marriage. More than that, they'd issued a permanent injunction preventing Richard from any further legal challenges. It was over. Truly, finally over. Caleb read it twice, as if needing to confirm the words wouldn't change. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. "It's done," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's done," Lila confirmed. He pulled her into his arms right there in the garden, Martha watching with a smile that suggested she'd known all along how this would end. Lila held on to her husband, this man who'd saved her from darkness, and let herself believe completely for the first time that this life was real and permanent and hers to keep. "We should celebrate," Martha suggested. "A party for the whole ranch. Let everyone know the fight's over, and we won." Caleb pulled back, looking at Lila. "What do you think?" "A party. Public acknowledgement of their victory, of their legitimacy, of everything they'd fought for. 6 months ago, the thought would have terrified her. Now she found herself nodding. "Yes. Let's show them what Iron Vale is made of." The party was held the following Saturday, and it seemed like half the territory showed up. Ranchers from neighboring spreads, merchants from Silver Springs, even Judge Marsh herself made an appearance, her presence a clear statement of support. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by Martha and the ranch wives, roasted beef, fresh bread, pies made from Lila's garden fruit, and enough coffee to float a ship. Lila wore a new dress for the occasion, dark blue with simple lines that Martha had helped her select from the dressmaker in town. It wasn't fancy, but it fit well and made her feel less like a washerwoman and more like the woman she was becoming. When Caleb saw her, his expression made her blush. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "I look presentable," she corrected, but she was smiling. "Beautiful," he insisted, and kissed her before she could argue further. The celebration was in full swing when an unexpected guest arrived. Lila saw him first, a flicker of recognition followed by a jolt of anxiety. Her mother, Eleanor Hart, stepped down from a hired carriage, dressed in her perpetual black, her face set in its familiar lines of disapproval. Caleb tensed beside her. "Want me to send her away?" Lila considered it. Part of her wanted exactly that. Wanted to turn her mother away the way Eleanor had turned away from her so many times. But another part, the part that was learning to be generous in victory, hesitated. "No," she said quietly. "Let her come. Let her see what I've become." Eleanor approached slowly, her eyes taking in the prosperous ranch, the celebrating crowd, the obvious signs of success and legitimacy. When she reached Lila and Caleb, she stopped, her expression unreadable. "Mother," Lila said, her voice neutral. "Lila." Eleanor's gaze swept over her daughter, cataloging the new dress, the healthy color in her cheeks, the way she stood, not hunched and defeated, but straight and proud. "You look well." "I am well." An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, her voice stiff. "I heard about the court's decision. Congratulations." "Thank you. I also heard you've made changes here, hired women for ranch work, paying them the same as men." Lila lifted her chin. "That's right. Equal work deserves equal pay." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, and Lila braced for criticism. But what came instead surprised her. "Your father would have approved," Eleanor said quietly. "He always said women work twice as hard for half the credit." It was the closest thing to approval Eleanor had ever offered. Lila didn't know what to say. Eleanor looked at Caleb, assessing him with the same critical eyes she'd once used to judge Thomas. "You treat her well?" "I try to," Caleb said evenly. "She makes it easy." "See that you continue." Eleanor turned back to Lila. "I didn't come to make trouble. I came because you're my daughter, and despite everything, I wanted to see that you were all right. I can see that you are, more than all right." "Yes," Lila said, "I am." Eleanor nodded once, sharp and final. "Then I'll leave you to your celebration. You've earned it." She paused, something working in her face. "I'm sorry, Lila, for what I said in that church, for a lot of things. I let my bitterness make me cruel." The apology hung in the air between them, unexpected and imperfect, but real. Lila felt years of anger loosen their grip on her heart. "I forgive you," she said, and meant it, "but I can't forget, not yet." "I understand." Eleanor moved as if to leave, then stopped. "You've done well for yourself, better than I thought possible. I was wrong about you, about a lot of things." She left then, climbing back into her carriage and disappearing down the road. Lila watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. They would never have the relationship she'd once hoped for as a child. But perhaps they'd found something else, a kind of peace, an ending if not a reconciliation. Caleb's hand found hers. "You all right?" "Yeah," Lila said, surprised to find it true. "I really am." The party continued late into the evening, and Lila found herself moving through the crowd with growing confidence. She spoke with the other ranchers' wives, discussed cattle prices with the men, laughed at jokes, and accepted congratulations. She was one of them now, not an outsider, not a curiosity, but a legitimate member of this community. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Judge Marsh approached her, a glass of wine in hand. "Mrs. Voss," she said warmly, "I wanted to tell you personally how impressed I was with your testimony. It made my decision much easier." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Please call me Helena. We're not in court." The judge smiled. "You know, when I first heard about your marriage, I was skeptical. A woman your age marrying a man she'd just met, a man embroiled in a massive inheritance dispute? It sounded like exactly the kind of calculated arrangement Richard claimed it was. Lila's defenses rose, but Helena continued before she could speak. But then I saw you both in my courtroom. I watched how you spoke about each other, how you stood together, how you faced pressure. And I realized something: calculating doesn't mean false. You made a choice based on practical needs, yes, but you also made a commitment to honor that choice, to build something real from it. That's rarer than romantic love, in my experience. Romance fades, commitment endures. That's what we're trying to build, Lila said. Something that endures. You're succeeding. Don't let anyone tell you different. Helena raised her glass. To practical choices and the wisdom to honor them. Lila raised her own glass, feeling the weight of the words settle into her bones. Yes, that was exactly what they were building. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Lila found herself alone with Caleb on the porch of the main house. The sounds of cleanup drifted from behind them, Martha directing the ranch wives, laughter and conversation mixing with the clink of dishes. "Quite a day," Caleb said, settling into one of the chairs they'd added last month. "Quite a 6 months," Lila corrected, taking the chair beside him. "That too." He was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about what comes next." "What comes next?" "For Iron Vale, for us. We've spent so much energy fighting for this place. I haven't thought much about what we do now that we've won." Lila considered this. "We build, like we planned. Expand the operation, improve the workers' housing, create something that lasts beyond us." "Beyond us," Caleb repeated thoughtfully. "We should talk about that. About legacy. About what happens to Iron Vale when we're gone." It was a heavy topic, but not an unwelcome one. Lila had been thinking about it too, especially since Carver's death had shown how quickly everything could change. "We don't have children," she said carefully. "We won't have children." "No," Caleb agreed. At 45, Lila was long past childbearing, and they'd both accepted that truth. "But that doesn't mean we can't leave something behind." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we could create something different. A trust, maybe. Set it up so Iron Vale stays intact but benefits the community. Provide employment, support local families, maybe even fund education for ranch workers' children. Make it bigger than just one family's wealth." The idea sparked something in Lila's imagination. We could set aside land for workers who want to start their own small operations. Help them build something for themselves instead of just working for wages their whole lives. Exactly. Give people the chances we had to fight for. Caleb's enthusiasm was growing. We could make Iron Vale a model for how a ranch should operate. Fair wages, good conditions, opportunities for advancement regardless of gender or background. People will call us radicals. Let them. We've been called worse, Lila smiled. True enough. They sat in comfortable silence, planning and dreaming as they so often did now. This was what their marriage had become. Not just partnership in running a ranch, but partnership in building a vision of what the world could be if people were willing to try something different. "Lila," Caleb said after a while, his voice serious, "I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "What?" "When I first came to Blackstone Ridge, when I saw you in that shack, I told myself I was being practical, that I needed a wife for legal reasons, and you were a practical choice, someone who'd understand a business arrangement, who wouldn't expect romance or pretty lies. I know, you told me that. But that wasn't the whole truth." He turned to face her fully. "The moment I saw you, saw how you kept working even though your hands were bleeding, saw how you'd survived years of hardship without breaking, I didn't just see a practical choice. I saw someone remarkable, someone I wanted to know, wanted to stand beside. The inheritance was an excuse, Lila, a way to justify offering you what I wanted to offer anyway." Lila's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I don't want there to be any lies between us. Not even the ones I told myself." His hand found hers. "I love you. I don't know when it happened, maybe that first night, maybe gradually over these months. But it's true. I love you, and not because you're useful or practical or any of the reasons I originally told myself. I love you because you're you." The words hit her like a physical force. Love. At 45, after a lifetime of being told she wasn't worthy of it, someone loved her. Not despite her age or her scars or her past, but because of the person all those things had forged her into. "I love you too," she heard herself say, and it was true. Somewhere between that frozen night in Blackstone Ridge and this moment, between fighting legal battles and building a household and learning to trust again, she'd fallen in love with her husband. "I didn't think I could anymore. Didn't think I had it in me. But I do. I love you, Caleb Voss." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Lila kissed him back with all the passion she'd thought was dead and buried. Around them, the ranch settled into nighttime quiet, the celebration over, the future stretching ahead bright with possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb smiled. "Should we go inside, Mrs. Voss?" "In a minute." Lila wanted to savor this moment, this feeling of completeness. "I just want to sit here a bit longer, look at all of this and know it's real." "It's real," Caleb assured her, "as real as it gets." The summer faded into autumn and autumn into winter. The first year of their marriage rolled into the second, then the third. Richard made no more attempts to contest the will, having finally accepted defeat. Word came eventually that he'd married an heiress back east and had moved into politics, the ranch forgotten in pursuit of other ambitions. Lila and Caleb implemented their plans for Iron Vale systematically and carefully. They built new housing for the married workers, solid cabins with real windows and proper heating. They established a school for the ranch children, hiring a teacher from back east who was willing to educate both boys and girls in reading, writing, and practical skills. They set aside parcels of land for workers who wanted to start their own operations, providing seed money and guidance. The changes drew attention from across the territory. Some criticized them as too progressive, too radical, too willing to upset the established order. But others watched with interest, and slowly, other ranches began implementing similar programs. Iron Vale became known not just for its size, but for its innovation, for the way it treated workers as partners rather than servants. Lila thrived in her role as co-owner and manager. She discovered she had a talent for organization and strategy, for seeing connections others missed. She expanded the vegetable gardens into a full market operation, selling surplus produce in Silver Springs and using the profits to fund the school. She established relationships with merchants and suppliers, negotiating better deals through volume purchases coordinated with neighboring ranches. The washerwoman who'd frozen in a shack became a businesswoman respected throughout the territory. And if people whispered about her age or her past, they did it quietly because Lila Voss was not someone you wanted as an enemy. On a cold December morning in their 4th year of marriage, Lila woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window of their bedroom. Snow had fallen overnight, transforming Iron Vale into something pristine and beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. "About how far we've come," he said. 4 years ago, I was a ranch hand with a secret and a dying father's impossible dream. You were washing clothes in the dark. Now look at us." Lila joined him at the window, looking out over the land they'd built together. "Do you ever regret it? Taking the risk on a stranger?" "Never." He pulled her close. "Best decision I ever made. Even though I came with so much baggage, so many complications, especially because of that. You knew what mattered and what didn't. You still do." He kissed the top of her head. "I got exactly what I needed. A partner who's strong enough to stand beside me, smart enough to challenge me, and brave enough to build something new." "And what did I get?" Lila asked, though she knew the answer. "Everything you deserved. Respect, security, partnership, love. The things that should have been yours all along." She turned in his arms to face him. "I used to think my life was over at 45, that I'd survive a few more years and die alone and forgotten. And now? Now I think my life didn't really start until 45. Everything before was just preparation for this." She gestured out the window at the ranch, at the life they'd built. "For us." Caleb smiled, that warm, genuine smile that still made her heart quicken. "Then we'd better make the most of it." They did. Over the years that followed, Lila and Caleb built Iron Vale into something that transcended simple success. It became a model, a proof that treating people with dignity and fairness didn't just make moral sense, it made business sense. Workers who felt valued worked harder, stayed longer, built loyalty that couldn't be bought. The ranch prospered beyond anyone's expectations. The cattle operation expanded, the market garden grew into a significant revenue stream, and the land they'd set aside for worker operations produced a new generation of small ranchers who remained connected to Iron Vale through shared resources and mutual support. Lila's reputation grew as well. She was invited to speak at territorial meetings about ranch management and worker relations. Other ranchers' wives sought her advice on everything from household management to business strategy. She became, to her own amazement, someone whose opinion mattered. But the greatest changes were internal, invisible to outside eyes. Lila learned to trust that good things could last, learned to accept love without waiting for it to be snatched away, learned that her worth wasn't determined by youth or beauty or social standing, but by what she built and how she treated people and the strength of her character. She learned, most importantly, that it was never too late. Never too late to start over, to find love, to build something meaningful. The world had tried to tell her that 45 was an ending, but 45 had been her beginning. On the morning of her 50th birthday, Lila stood on the porch of the main house and watched the sun rise over Iron Vale. 50 years old, half a century. She'd survived poverty, widowhood, shame, and hardship. She'd been broken down and built back up. She'd lost everything and gained more than she'd ever imagined possible. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Happy birthday. Thank you. I have something for you. He held out a small box. Inside was a ring, simple gold, engraved with words that made her throat tighten. You are enough. So you never forget, Caleb said softly. So you always know. Lila slipped the ring onto her finger beside her wedding band. I won't forget, I promise. Good. He kissed her cheek. Because you are. You always were. You just needed someone to believe it until you could believe it yourself. They stood together watching the sunrise, two people who'd found each other in darkness and built something luminous together. The ranch stirred to life around them, workers heading to the barn, smoke rising from cabin chimneys, the ordinary miracle of another day beginning. This was her life now. Not the life she'd planned at 20, not the life she'd dreamed of before everything fell apart, but a life she'd chosen, fought for, and built with her own hands alongside a partner who saw her value when the rest of the world had written her off. Lila Voss, co-owner of Iron Vale Ranch, wife, businesswoman, advocate, survivor. 50 years old and just getting started. She smiled, squeezed Caleb's hand, and stepped forward into the day, into her life, into the future she'd earned, and it was glorious.